If you are feeling like you don't know what to do with your show, you're contemplating stopping it entirely, starting fresh because you're just not getting the downloads that you want your podcast to be discovered by the right people, and it's just not working out well for you, then this episode is for you. Today, we are sharing a special episode that is a live strategy session with yours truly. I'm going to be doing a live strategy session and podcast audit with Erin of Medium Lady Talks, sharing some really impactful things, but easy things that she can do to make the most of the show for 5 years. She's not seeing the downloads she wants, and she wants to increase that number and see it really grow. So we go through SEO strategies, some ideas on how to better manage her guests, as well as some things within the episode that can help her grow her audience. Please join me in welcoming Erin to this special strategy session episode. Welcome to Podcasting Unlocked, the show for purpose-driven podcasters. I'm Alicia Galati, founder of Galati Media, and I'm here to share actionable strategies to help you amplify your message and grow your audience. Hi, Erin. I'm so excited to be doing this strategy session with you today. If you could just tell everybody a bit about who you are, what you do, and about your podcast.
Yeah, so my name is Erin. I'm a mom of 3 kids. I have a full-time 9 to 5 as a hospital administrator in Ontario, Canada. And I have 2 podcasts on the side. One is Medium Lady Talks. That's my flagship podcast where I talk about burnout and millennial motherhood, resisting all the things that make life really hard and finding a way to feel like you're okay, to feel well-ish in today's current times. There's like a lot of things that like stack up against us at this time, but nonetheless, we persist. My other podcast, the sister podcast, is Medium Lady Reads, which I co-host with my dear bookish best friend, Jillian O'Keefe. And every 2 weeks, we hop on mic and each bring 3 books to the episode that we've read, reviewed, and recommend or don't recommend to the audience. So yeah, that's me.
Love it. And we did have Jillian on the podcast, so we'll make sure that we link to that episode for people who want to learn more about Instagram, because she had some really great strategies and tips for that. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I was able to listen to a few of your episodes, looked through your podcast description, your podcast categories, was able to dive into a lot of that stuff. And I know you wanted to focus on podcast marketing today. Let me ask you this first. When you say podcast marketing, is your goal more downloads or is it more social media visibility?
Oh, it's definitely more downloads.
Yeah,
I
fun.
had an Instagram community before I started the podcast. And I always made this assumption that the community would be a good conversion to the podcast. The longer I've been doing this, I'm in my 5th season. I really don't find that there's as much overlap between the Instagram audience and the podcast success, I guess, or the podcast downloads. And so what I've been trying to realize after learning a lot as I go is how to get the podcast out there to podcast listeners, because my followers are not necessarily people who are podcast listeners. I do find that there's a really specific type of person who will go out of their way to find a podcast, download it, make time for it in their day to listen to it. That's not always going to be the person who enjoys my stories or who enjoys my Instagram content. They're maybe consuming something at a smaller pace, smaller amount of focus, and they're going to want to consume that content while they're in the app. They're not necessarily going to be motivated to leave a very attractive app like Instagram to go and find the podcast. Now, I don't want to say that's none of my followers. Certainly, some of my followers do listen to the podcast. I've even found this with guests. Some guests really convert a lot of downloads and some don't. You would assume, or at least when I was early on, the bigger the following, the better the episode would do. And that's really not the case at all. I've had people with really small followings have their episodes do tremendously well because for whatever reason, their community is of the personality that will go and find an episode. And so that's been an interesting thing that I've learned along the way. It is still really hard to find the best people to get my podcast in front of people because I really believe in my content. I really feel like it's well produced, good quality. The content is very sound, and I know it can help people. My goal in terms of marketing is to get it in front of more people because I know it will help them.
Yeah. And I have that on my list. So we're definitely going to
Oh,
be touching on guests and all of that stuff because I know you do have quite a few guests on your show. We will talk through that as well. Okay, perfect. So the goal is increase in downloads. You're in your fifth season, feeling really frustrated because the numbers aren't looking how you expect them to. Do you want to share those numbers or do you not feel comfortable?
oh my gosh, no, I can totally share the numbers. I would say on average, an episode gets about 35 downloads in the first week. And then in the first month, we might get that episode to like 50-ish downloads. I think that's probably about an average. An episode will sit around the 50 mark, and I release weekly. I don't have as good of a finger on Medium Lady Reads because that's like my fun podcast, and Medium Lady Talks is my serious podcast. Although I guess that doesn't really make sense the way that I'm thinking about it. Those are the numbers. And I'm not trying to get the podcast to a place where I can pivot out of my 9 to 5. I
Right.
love my job. I have an incredible job. It's a huge part of my identity. But I know that my content is solid and I know that it helps people. And so the best way for it to help more people, which I'm really passionate about, is to get more downloads.
Yeah. So you said you get about 30 something in the first 7 days.
Yeah.
Okay. So that already puts you in the top 50% of podcasts. I
Really?
want like just to give
No, it's
you
good perspective.
some peace right around that for anyone listening who's like, I get around 32 and might be feeling discouraged as well. That still puts you in the top 50%, the podcasts that are producing regularly. So that is incredible. All right. So let's go ahead and get into some SEO stuff because search engine optimization, for those who are like, what is SEO? I think this is going to help you with searchability. Let's take Instagram out of it a little bit.
Yeah.
We want to find podcast listeners where they are hanging out, which is
Mhm.
typically on their podcast listening app. You want to be able to capture them as best you can right out the gate. And so for SEO, I would say for your podcast, because it doesn't really, the title, Medium
Mhm.
Lady, is it their talks on there or is it just
Mhm.
Medium Lady?
Medium Lady Talks.
Okay, so Medium Lady Talks, and we'll be talking about Medium Lady Talks throughout this, and a
Yeah.
lot of these things you can apply to Medium Lady Reads if you so choose, right? But for
Yeah.
this conversation, we're gonna do Medium Lady Talks. So Medium Lady Talks, now you've explained to me what that means, but I don't think the average person would understand. So could you explain it for the listeners?
Yeah. So long time ago, because he's 12, but when he was 6, my oldest son said to me, "Hey, mom, you're a medium lady." And I said, "Oh, what do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, you're not a young lady and you're not an old lady. You're a medium lady." And I think at the time I was kind of searching for an identity to start playing around online and expressing myself through writing and Instagram posts and, whatever. And when he called me that medium lady, it just stuck with me. And so that's what I ran with. Now, I knew you were going to focus on this, Alicia, because this is the thing that I'm attached to. And yet, objectively, I can't believe you went there right away. I absolutely understand that if I have to explain it, then it's not going to resonate with the person who's going to just impulsively click and find the podcast where it's at. I have been thinking over the last 6 months about rebranding. What would rebranding look like? I know that my audience becomes attached to the medium lady idea. With calling myself medium lady, I've also said, listen, like you want to find the medium effort way to get to where you want to go in life. You don't want to live high effort. You don't want to live low effort. We want to kind of stop being so hard on ourselves and also like find the motivation and energy to do the things we want to do, which means harnessing medium effort. A lot of my existing audience, especially on Instagram, really love that. And that's a medium where I can explain and re explain medium lady and medium effort more continuously and more in synchronicity with the audience. The other thing that happened earlier on, and it doesn't really happen as much anymore, is I would get approached by people who thought I was a psychic.
Right.
I'd have to explain psychics are awesome, but unfortunately, I'm not a psychic, but I can help you in other ways. That always made me laugh, and I really enjoyed that. But Yeah. So tell me more. I'm talking a lot, but you've
It's
really
okay.
kind of gotten to my vulnerability because objectively, I think your feedback is totally valid.
So hopefully this gives you some peace as well. Is I actually don't think you need to change the name. I
Oh,
think you
really?
need to add an addendum to it. We're seeing this a lot more with podcasters, especially when you already have 100 and something episodes, right? Like you don't necessarily want to change anything, but how can you
Yeah.
explain a little further what
Mhm.
the podcast is about? So I have some ideas here just to kind of shoot them off at you. So something like Medium Lady Talks. And right now on your cover, you have four burnt out millennials and mothers,
Mhm.
right? Which is, we're headed in the right direction,
Mhm.
adding something like that. But something like Millennial Motherhood minus the burnout. Millennial Mom Burnout Recovery, right?
Mhm.
Something that encompasses what someone is going to be searching for that your content speaks to. So keeping that in mind of like, all right, it's for millennials. Cool. So if I'm a millennial and I'm like millennial podcasts, your podcast could come up.
Mhm.
Motherhood podcasts, your podcast
Mhm.
could come up, right? This is your ideal audience. So you don't necessarily have to change Medium Lady Talks at all. Just adding, have a little colon there and then add in a little more detail of what it is that your show is really about.
I mean, that feels easy. Yeah.
Love it.
No, because I've been thinking about, like, maybe I sunset the podcast and start a new podcast called Burnout Recovery Roadmap with Medium Lady or something along the lines of what you've just already stated. So I would just change the title of it to add that extra information.
Yep, and then you might wanna add it into the graphic at the top, so change
Yep.
out that for burnt out millennials and mothers to whatever your subtitle is, or just take it
Mhm.
off completely. As long as you have the medium lady talks on the cover, then you should be fine. Yes, having something like that. So moving on to the next SEO portion that I like to focus on, we've got the title. Next is the description. You start your description with "Hello, hi. I'm Erin," and I'm gonna read it just for people who are listening 'cause they're not necessarily looking you up as I'm talking about this. "I'm Erin, and this podcast is about figuring out the medium effort way to get the most out of life today. I hope that the things I unpack here can help other women and invite them to explore their own ways to live life in the present. This is a show about experimenting to get closer to what matters most. I'm glad you're here, so let's settle in." All right. Love it, and let's build. So you've got a lot in there of who you are, what the goal of the show is, who it's for, right? I can see myself as, oh, yeah, this is something that I definitely am interested in. But we want to keep in mind that most people might skim the description. And if they're not seeing those long tail keywords that are like, yes, that's me, checking boxes, then they
Mhm.
might not listen. Also, the search engines do look at your podcast description for those long tail keywords to understand what your show is about. This is where, and I'm going to send you this as well. You don't have to write any notes, but to also give people an idea. There's something like this, I think, would help. Welcome to Medium Lady Talks, the podcast for burnt out millennial moms seeking balance and a more manageable life. Join Erin, so you want to have it in third person. Join Erin as
Mm.
she shares practical tips and relatable insights on navigating motherhood, career, and personal well being, all with a medium effort approach. If you're tired of striving for perfection and feeling overwhelmed, you're in the right place. We dive into topics like burnout recovery, self care for busy moms, simplifying daily routines, and finding joy in the present moment. Erin's honest and encouraging conversations offer a space to explore realistic strategies for personal growth and rediscover what truly matters without adding to your already full plate. Let Medium Lady be your guide to a more balanced and fulfilling life as a millennial mother. And then you would end it with something like connect with Erin on Instagram at medium.lady.
Oh my
How
gosh.
does that feel?
I mean, it feels incredible. I think you nailed it. It's funny because sometimes these are things you do early on in the journey and you don't really go back to them. Whatever I wrote, which was probably in 2021, it's a good reminder that as you get more confident in your content, you get more confident in your knowledge base, and you get more confident in your value to go back to that and put all that stuff in there. I don't think I had the confidence when I wrote the first description to really sell myself.
Right. Just like, hi, I'm here. check it out
Yeah.
for sure. Just fixing those two things, you should see an increase in people finding your show and that discoverability. And then they check it out and hopefully stay and listen, right? That gets into what's in the actual episode. Two more things on the SEO side. Categories. Right now, I'm seeing you in personal journals. I don't love that. So I would love to see you not in personal journals. There are so many categories, and also thinking 2021, there were different categories too. So that's probably
Mm.
something that you haven't gone back
Oh
and
my
looked at
gosh,
to
no, I
refresh.
didn't even know I could change it.
Yes, you can. So personal journals, I like to think of as like maybe you're an athlete and you're just kind of talking through your journey, right? I would personally change it to self improvement, which is under education. So the top category is
Yeah,
education, self
yeah.
improvement. Next, parenting under kids and family.
Mhm,
And then last, careers under business.
mhm.
I like to think of the categories, and you can take this and run with it however you want. I have a link in the thing I'm going to send you, as well as in the show notes. We'll have the link for this as well. It is what Buzzsprout gives as like, here are all of the categories you could possibly be in. It's a full comprehensive list. And so I like to look at that every once in a while and I like to think, all right, look, you can pick up to three. The first one should always be, I definitely belong here. I belong in this category. Second one is, I could fit here too, most likely. And then the third one is, where could I be a breath of fresh air
Hmm,
in this category? So that's how I like to think of it. So
yeah,
that's why I thought self improvement, definitely. Parenting, I could fit there too. And then careers, right? Might not talk about careers a lot, but that is woven into your story and it
yeah.
is part of your identity, as you stated. So you could be a breath of fresh air to some women who are looking in the careers category and are like, what is this podcast? Let me check it out. So
Mhm.
thinking about that. You can also rank in all three of them, which is why I recommend that people pick all three if you
Right.
possibly can.
Don't leave anything on the table.
Exactly. How does that feel?
That feels great. I mean, again, like, I'm feeling sheepish that I'm thinking here that I'd have to, like, end my current podcast after 5 seasons and start fresh in order to be found easier, when really I have to just go back to some decisions I made in 2021 and, like, upgrade and, make changes. And this is like where it can be hard as a podcast creator. When you're starting, you feel really precious about it. And every decision feels like it's going to make or break you. And then it's not until you're like 4 years in when you're like, "Oh yeah, some of those decisions actually are making or breaking me." But you forget that like you can just change your mind and refresh and update. So like this is very empowering.
Awesome. So let's get into show notes. Now, this is a conversation that I had with someone recently. I'm trying to remember if it was a team member or if it was, no, it was a client. And she was like, how important are the show notes?
Because show notes are the worst.
They are. Yes.
If I gave up podcasting, I would be so sad, but I would be happy to never have to write show notes again.
Yes. They
Legit.
can be very difficult. I agree. So, show notes, you start them with hello, hi, which is how you introduce
Yeah.
your podcast description. I'm going to say nix that right off the gate. I would like to have your first sentence be either getting to the pain point that the episode is discussing or right into the topic so that your audience is searching for based on what you're talking about. Do you do setups for your guest episodes?
No, I
No?
don't.
Okay.
I don't generally, and that's more of a time management thing.
Right. And that's totally okay. You get to decide if you want to or not. One thing that I would recommend is depending on how long your turnaround is from recording to releasing, just writing a few notes as maybe the person's talking or right after you finish, just jotting something down real quick of top highlights or top thoughts that'll help
Mhm,
you. Do you
mhm.
record on Riverside?
Yeah.
Okay. And do you have their business plan where they write show notes for you?
I have the lower package.
So if show notes is something that you're feeling really frustrated with, it might be worth increasing
Yeah.
$10, $15 extra a month just to have those show notes option because they're not the best, but they're not the worst
Okay.
either. And they're at least a starting point which is what I really like. At least give me something to start working with rather
Right.
than me having to go back and be like, I have to listen to this again just to write show notes. No, just give me a
Well, I
starting point.
generally because I edit, I generally write my show notes while I edit. So hopefully, at least in that workflow, I'm not losing out on some of the highlights, but I guess you can't always trust yourself. Well, I guess I can trust myself, but to be the best proxy for the audience to know what's going to be best for SEO or what's going to really jump out at someone who wants to listen.
And so that is the part that is really important. And this goes back to what I was talking to a client about last week. 98%, I want to say, and this is just from my understanding of podcast listeners and how they navigate these apps. 98% of podcast listeners do not look at the show notes. The 2% that do go there for links. So the show notes are not for them. I have
Right.
clients that try to rewrite it and make sure it's in their voice and like, hey, girl, no, 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 no. That is not going to work for the apps. We need to be thinking about these show notes as what does the algorithm want? Which is why I think it's okay to use something like Gemini,
Yeah.
ChatGPT,
Yeah.
Riverside AI.
Yeah.
Say, here's my transcript, write my show notes for me. This is the order of show notes and how I typically have it either spit it back at me or how I typically write them if I'm writing my show notes while I'm editing as well. And so the first paragraph, you're going to have 3 to 4 sentences hitting the pain point of whatever you're discussing. So, are you feeling frustrated with this? You might find yourself doing this. Then getting into today, we have this guest to talk about this, share her or his experience about XYZ. And then what I like to do is, and I'm finding this is really good for my rebrand because we rebranded from listeners to leads to podcasting
Mhm.
unlocked. But if someone were to look up listeners to leads, all my past episodes still show up, which is really helpful for me. I didn't have to put previously known as listeners to leads in the podcast description because I have listeners to leads 3 times in my show notes. So I'll say episode 175 of Listeners to Leads podcast is about, and I restate the title.
Yeah.
So thinking SEO. This is not for the people who are going to read it because no one's going to read it most likely. Right? It might be
Yeah.
like the very one person that might
Yeah.
read it, but most people are not reading it. So what can I do to re-emphasize to these apps what this topic or what this podcast episode is about? So I stopped there. Then I might have the bio of the guest, right? So a few lines of that. So that initial paragraph, the bio, then going into key takeaways. So in this episode, we discuss and then 5 bullet points about. So you could do anywhere from 3 to 5, depending on how long they are.
Mhm.
And then ending with a key takeaway of, something I usually try to go with like inspirational of
Yeah.
like, don't forget to take care of yourself during this, whatever. Ending with something like that. And then where to connect to learn more about this podcast and Alicia, go to, and then I have my website in there, and then how to connect with the guests, and then how to connect and work with me. How does that flow kind of feel?
It feels good. I think it's pretty much a lot of the moving parts that I already have. It's just, again, similar to your other advice, it's about remembering who it's for. It is kind of about writing for the machine to help the machine help you. That also depersonalizes a little bit of the perfectionism because I'm not really worried of the machine judging me.
Right.
But I do worry about my listeners being like, "Well, these show notes are really weird." I think you're right. I also listen to a lot of podcasts, and I would never read show notes except to go for a book link. Like, I wanna know what that book was, I wanna find it, I'm gonna get it from the library or buy it, or to find a guest. If there was a guest on a podcast that I really liked and I was like, "Oh, I'd like to learn more about their stuff," then I do that.
Yeah. So that helps too, right? Alleviate some of that stress of I have to do all these things. Like most of it we can offload to the tools that we're already
Mhm.
using or to free tools as well. And I think that that really helps because we are busy. And it's like,
Yeah.
we've already edited it.
Yeah.
Do I have to do more? I have to
Yeah.
create graphics. I got to do
Yeah.
all these things. Like,
Yeah.
let's remove one thing, right? And being the thing that you hate the most,
Yeah.
remove that.
True.
Okay, awesome. So that is it for the SEO portion. Now, that is
Mhm.
a lot, but a lot, if
Mhm.
by shifting those things, adjusting them, tweaking them, that is going to help you grow on these podcast apps and the discoverability of your show on that end. Next, I want to move on to guests. Is there anything you want to talk about before we move on to guests?
No, I feel like you were like, "That's a lot," but what I've been contemplating is sort of like starting from scratch. So, it's not a lot compared to starting from scratch. So, I feel kind of like a weight has been lifted, and all of this is very doable. So, thank you.
Yes, awesome. All right, so guests. I 100% agree with you what you said at the beginning, that guests who you think are, they've got big audiences, they're going to funnel lots of people to you, don't always work out that way. And I have found that the reasoning is that their audience tends to be inundated with podcasts that they've been on. A lot of
Mm,
these higher profile people are on 20 to 50 podcasts a year. And so their audience already has a lot of this, hey, new episode, new episode, new episode. And they've heard them talk. They're already following them. So it doesn't
yeah.
always translate. Whereas the people with fewer followers end up doing really well because they are so excited to share about the podcast. They go
Mhm.
out of their way to talk about it, to reshare it. Oh my gosh, look what I did. And so that's why it's important for us as hosts to make sure we're giving them as much as we possibly can to share that episode. What does that cycle time look like for you with when you record to when the episode goes live?
It's variables. If you and I were interviewing today, your episode would go live in about 3 weeks. When your episode goes live, I have a static post that I post to Instagram. I would invite you to be a collaborator on that if you wish. And then I would hop in stories. I promote each episode in stories every week to remind people. I share the links for Apple Podcasts and Spotify. My episodes go live on Mondays. So that would happen on Monday. Then I would probably on Thursday come back on stories and re promote the episode again with more links. And then maybe on Saturday or Sunday, I might share a reel that is either me doing a talking head to the camera about how great the episode is and how much it'll help you. I might tag or collaborate on that with the guest. Or I'll pull a clip from Riverside and I'll share the clip from Riverside as a way to encourage people to see the episode. So there's sort of like 3 touch points: static post, stories, and then a reel.
How does that current flow feel?
I just think whether it's a solo episode or a guest episode, it's the same flow. The only thing that changes is that I would add the guest as a collaborator on some of the content.
It doesn't feel like it's too much or like you're on social too much or anything like that?
No, I mean, for my personality, I'm on social almost every day, just like bopping around and doing my thing. No, it doesn't
Okay.
feel too much. And I also feel like I can opt out of some of it if I'm having one of those weeks, which, like, who isn't lately?
Is that the only information you give your guest about their episode going live? Or do you send them an email or anything like that?
It kind of depends on the guest. I don't have a solid workflow for that. Most of my guests I connect with through Instagram first. So I would send them an email being like, your episode's going live tomorrow. I'll be promoting it on Instagram and I'll tag you. If you want to share that with your community, that would be great. It's pretty informal.
I would recommend it being more formal. You mentioned at the beginning that the time frame is typically you record and then about 3 weeks later the episode goes live. To keep you top of mind, I would, and this is an automation that you can set up with a Calendly or whatever you're using to
Mhm.
schedule this. I have it with mine where a week after I record with them, I send them an email that says, "Hey, thanks so much for recording with me last week. I really appreciated our time together. I can't wait to share your episode with my audience. It's going to be a while. I'm 3 to 4 months out with
Yeah.
mine. So it's going to be a while before your episode goes live, but I'd love to stay connected. Here's my Instagram. Here's my LinkedIn. And
Mhm.
I'd also love it if you left a review on the podcast if you feel so inclined, right? Keep me in mind. Let's stay connected. Loved our chat, but it's not right away where they're like, I literally just talked to you, lady. But it's far enough away that we're like, oh, yeah, I remember. That was a good conversation.
Right.
Love to stay connected. And so that is one thing that I like to do. And then hopefully this helps other people as well who are listening. Just as a tip to keep us top of mind as hosts and like, hey, your episode is coming out and I'm excited to share it.
Mhm.
Next, when the episode goes live, and you can decide how you want to do this, whether it's when you have all the assets ready and you've uploaded it, or when it goes live. I think it also depends on who your hosting platform is as well, because you might not have those links just yet. But what I like to do is I will send them, and I have this templated. I will share my template with you so you can have it. And it is your episode went live today email. And in it, I have the first part of it is just like, thank you so much. Are you as excited as I am? Because I'm excited, because usually that's how I like to start the conversations anyways. I'm excited. Your episode is officially live today. I can't wait to share it with you. And then the first thing I share is I'm going to be posting about it on my social media platforms. Here are the links so you can connect with me over there. We'll be sure to tag you if we can on any of these platforms. If I am doing a collaboration post with them, then I'll say, I'm going to try to collaborate with you. If you don't want to because it messes up your Instagram aesthetic, totally get
Yeah.
it. Here is the Google Doc to your assets. What
Mm.
this does is it allows them to also look at, maybe I've got a few more reels because my team creates 3 to 4 reels per episode. We post a lot of them on YouTube, but only one goes on my Instagram. And so there's
Mhm.
lots of options where they're like, oh, I really like that one. I had one guest where I talked about how it was working with her. And I didn't share that one because it didn't make sense for the topic of the episode, but I wanted her to have it so she could promote, like, here's what it's like to work with me, right?
Mhm.
And so something like that where it's like, this is going to be really helpful for them to share on their end if they want to, and also to re-promote at any point, or maybe they want to put it on TikTok or whatever. So sending them the link to the Google social assets folder, and that could be simply the static post. I know you have a quote as well on there. Maybe they want to share it in a different way, or maybe they want to. I have a friend who does this regularly when she's a guest on a podcast, because she's really picky about her aesthetics, is she will put just a regular photo as the first one. And then the rest of the carousel is about the episode.
Mhm.
And so giving them that option, right? She might not reach out and say, can you send me those things? But just giving the guests as much information as possible to make it super easy for them to
Mhm.
share on their end. So giving them that. And then I end it with, here are the direct links to your episode. That way, if they have an email list and they want to just grab that link real quick and
Mhm.
plop it into their email and then share it with their email list, and that helps them. So I usually share the Buzzsprout link because I use Buzzsprout as a hosting platform. So I'll share the Buzzsprout link, and then I'll also share the YouTube link
Mhm.
as well as the blog post that I have. So any direct links. So not Spotify. Well, if Spotify is your hosting platform, then you might want to do Spotify, but not Spotify, Apple, or any of the other apps, just wherever they can directly send their audience to where I'd want to capture them in the easiest way. And then ending with thank you so much. And then that's it. But then obviously making sure that I tag them on social media when I'm posting about it. Now,
Yeah.
I do have this templated. So what I like to do is all my stuff is already templated in there, like my social media stuff. And so I only have to provide those 4 links
Yeah.
every time. The email is the same. It's just those social graphics, YouTube, blog post, and Buzzsprout. That is
Mhm.
it. So those are the only links I'm grabbing. And then I just send that out the day it goes live. How does that feel as something to kind of add into your workflow?
It feels a little more daunting, probably because even though I might record 3 weeks and then that episode goes live, I don't have a workflow that includes all of that prep before the episode goes live. So it would probably require me to rethink a little bit more about where I save things like those images because it's all on my phone. I'm commuting to work. I have a 1 hour commute both ways. Usually I sit down on the train and I think about what I need to get done for the podcast that day. So I'm doing a lot of it spontaneously. I would have to sit down and think about where I would be able to get organized. Maybe it's not all the things, maybe it's some of the things. And I definitely like the idea of reaching back out to the guest after and to say, oh, yeah, hey, we chatted a week ago. That was a great conversation. Just FYI, like these things are still going to be happening. And I'll see you in a couple weeks when the episode goes live.
My brain works in folders. For me, I tend to just like whenever we get a new client, I'm like, oh gosh, we need to reorganize all of this just to keep it succinct.
We don't even have folders.
Right.
We could start from scratch.
Exactly. Which can help, right? To just
Yeah.
say, all right, these are the graphics. And then you just have episode X and then a little who the guest is. And then that could be it could be as simple as that. And then just uploading it from when you download it to your phone, uploading it to your Google Drive, and then copying that link. Right? Could just be that simple if that's something that you feel thus inclined to do, right? These are all suggestions. You do not have to take them at all. They're simply meant to help. How does that feel for managing the guests a little better, getting them to share their episode a little more?
I think it feels good. I have never had an instance where I felt like a guest didn't share their episode or didn't have what they needed to do that. I have had people reach out to me to say, can I get the direct link for these things because my email list is going out? And each guest is also a little bit different in terms of what they have going on, what their business is, maybe their podcast host themselves. I think that it's good to think about not just the variability of my guests and meeting the needs of different guests, but having a tight package of how I work with guests every time, keeping that a little bit tighter and less organic and kind of like fly by the seat of your pants.
Which is okay if that's how you want to do it, right? And so that's where I think a lot of my counterparts tend to be like, no, you need to do it this way. And I'm like, look, if that's not going to work for your brain and that's not going to work for how you work, then
Mhm.
that's okay. If just meeting your guests where they are and them responding with, hey, I need a little more, and that works for you, then you get to do that too. This is just simply a tool that you can pick up and use or not. That's it.
Yeah.
Awesome. I want to end with this. Within the episode, there are a few notes that I have before
Mm.
we move on to that. We're good on the guests, or do you have any questions on that?
No, we're good.
Okay. Within the episode, I have two notes. Timing. If your audience is millennial moms on the cusp of burnout, then an hour-long episodes might not be best for capturing them. A lot of avid podcast listeners might see an hour and be like, "Ugh," right? And so if you're feeling thus inclined on exploring that, I do know that you had some recent episodes that were under 30 minutes.
Mhm.
I would be curious to see how those performed, not from the downloads perspective, but from the completion rate perspective.
Mm.
So I don't know if you've looked in the back end of Apple Podcasts at all, the Apple Podcast Manager. But if you go in there, you can see under episodes and then just pick the month that you're looking at. Then you can see on the right column, it'll be a dash if there's not enough information, but you would be able to see how much of an episode people are listening to. You
Okay.
can also see it on Spotify, but you have to go into each individual episode, so it's a little more finicky. But I would just look at an hour-long episode and then your recent 30-minute episode or less than 30-minute episode and see where are people dropping off? How
Yeah.
much of an episode are they listening to? Because you don't want your audience to not get to the end, right? You want them to be able to listen to potentially the whole thing if possible. I would say the average, what we've seen, and this is not, there's no actual data anywhere that I've been able to find for this. This is just from managing so many podcasts. The average we've seen is around 60 to 75% of an episode is average. How much of an episode people tend to be listening to. And so, what is the information that you might need to move to the front? Is that a make sure you connect with the guest? where to find them? Is it a make sure you connect with me? I know that you have some coaching stuff and your Patreon. I wouldn't wait till the end to mention that, but try to organically mention that throughout the episode, dropping it one or two times. Here's something I do, here's something else I do, just so that your audience gets that information before getting to the end, because a lot of people might get to the end, hear the music, skip on to the next episode or
For
not
sure.
listen through.
Yeah.
So finding other ways to put that content within the episode. So the timing, the length of time, checking on the data to give you the right direction to go,
Mhm.
because I can't tell you without looking at that whether your hour-long episodes are performing well or not.
Yeah.
That's just something you have to look at. And then within the episode, from that information, within the episode, being able to say, okay, what is the information that my audience needs to convert them to checking me out on Instagram or connecting with the guest or checking out my Patreon? What are some things that we can do that way? Any questions on that part?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think would just require from me, like, being less verbose, saying less, especially for my solo episodes. Certainly, the shorter the episode, the easier it is for people to consume. That makes a ton of sense. I like the idea of getting curious about the back end data to validate or verify in terms of episode length what's working for people.
Yeah.
I did a series last year with a collaborator who had this happiness framework, and we did really short, like 10, 12-minute episodes, and they did not do that well. So I was really
Mm,
surprised. Now, maybe 10 is too short, an hour is too long, and we have to find the Goldilocks time, which I was surprised because I did expect a
yeah.
shorter snippet would be better. It could also have been structure and timing. I did not know that I could go to the back end of Apple and look that up. So I'll be doing that for sure.
Yes. So all you gotta do is go to just reiterate for people who are listening are like, wait, what did you say? Go to your Apple Podcasts, connect, go into your analytics at the top. You'll see the menu there, analytics, and then under episodes, you'll be able to see more data on what is working and what's not, how much of an episode people are consuming. And if you see dashes there, it's just because there's not enough information from them. I'm sorry. Sometimes that happens. But looking at other places like Spotify, you'll have to dig into each individual episode, and I would spot check a few
Mhm.
to see how much of an episode people actually listen to, where are most of them dropping off, how much of your content people like to consume. I also like to look at it as if your number is over 100%, which is possible. If it's over 100%, that means that people went back and listened to it again. That is something to look at to say, wow, I had a lot of people go back and listen to this episode, or wow, they really like this topic. How can I capitalize on that and maybe bring it back around or bring in another guest to go deeper or whatever? And then that really helps you to be able to plan out your content going forward as well. So,
Mhm.
little pro tip in there for that.
Nice.
Awesome. All right. Before we end, do you have any questions or anything else that you're kind of like, I need to know this as well before we go?
No, I think that in my fifth year of podcasting, I should understand the game a little bit. So this was really, really refreshing, really eye opening, certainly made me feel more empowered to do some of the things that I normally would have said, like, oh, like, I'm just a small podcast. I don't need to get too fussed about SEO. I don't need to get too in the weeds on those things. The most important thing for me has always been to release an episode every week. And yet, there is a space I can make in my podcasting work for this kind of thing because it's going to help me get closer to what I want to do. So thank you.
And most of this you can do one time and then let
Yeah.
it sit for 6 months,
Yeah.
right? Which
Yeah.
is really good.
Love that.
Awesome. Before we go, where can people connect with you, learn more about you, check out your podcasts?
Yeah, you can find Medium Lady Talks and Medium Lady Reads wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts. The best place to connect with me is on Instagram. Like I confessed, I'm there messing around pretty much every day. You can find me at medium.lady. The dot is very important over there. And you can find me on Patreon. It's patreon.com/mediumlady. And we have for $5 a month, I provide weekly tips on self-care. We do this on a monthly basis. I give a theme for the month. So if you want to see what that's all about, you can find me on Patreon for $5 a month.
Awesome, and we'll make sure we have links for that in the description in the show notes for those who are checking
Gonna
the
go to the
show
show notes.
notes.
Yeah.
For the links, we'll have those for you. Erin, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.